All right, let's get started. The next talk is going to be by Kevin Lamping, who is one of the leading lights on WebdriverIO, runs one of the most popular tutorials on WebdriverIO. He's got over 10 years of experience as a front-end engineer. He's released a free 6-day email course on visual regression testing and also runs frontendtesting.com. Along with that, he also helps testyourlog.in and HillCountry.js, front-end community meetup in San Antonio. In his free time, when he's not playing with his kids, Kevin dabbles in scale model building, tabletop gaming, piano, and gardening. Over to you, Kevin.
Great. Let me go ahead and share my screen and just say hi to everybody. Or as I say in my videos, howdy, folks. That's a good way to get a consistent start, is to have just something dumb to say at the very beginning. But looks like we can have my screen shared. And let's get started with a quick introduction on who I am. As mentioned, my name is Kevin Lamping. I'm a front-end engineer and tester, kind of between the two. So I love dabbling in the front end, doing HTML, CSS, JavaScript, all the fun stuff there, and then actually focused on how do you test the front end, because it's a very, very complex environment to have to test it. I do have a lot of videos available on YouTube for free. You can go to my YouTube channel at videos.clamp.in. I also have, am finishing up this book that you see here, the Web App Testing Guidebook. It's about UI testing of real-world websites using WebdriverIO. You can check that out at book.clamp.in. It is an ebook only form. There's no physical form right now. But it also is not quite complete. It's about 95, 96% by my estimate done. And I hope to get it done within the next month, but all the material is there. I'm just making updates to bring it up to the latest. But anyway, you can go, you can purchase it already at book.clamp.in, more information there. Finally, I am available for consulting, whether you are on a team and you would like to get some help on that team, or you're just an individual looking for help. Just email me at clamp.in. There's a common clamp.in. I go with that. So let's get to WebdriverIO. Let's talk about what WebdriverIO is and what are the main features of it. Well, WebdriverIO, it's a full-featured automation framework, and I really want to emphasize the full-featured part of this. It's not just another automation framework out there that uses that ties into WebDriver or any of the other tools. This is a fully featured framework, and this is when people ask me about how does it compare to something like Puppeteer or Microsoft's new Playwright. Well, Puppeteer is great. It has some really cool functionality. It's really good for certain instances, but it's not full featured, and I'll get to full featured in just a minute. One of those parts of the full featured nature is for the browser and mobile. You can run both browser tests and mobile tests. You can kind of mix and match them, but that's a little bit more technical than I want to get into. Also, most recently, even though the name is WebdriverIO, it's not just Selenium or WebDriver. Those are amazing tools, and David's going to give a great talk about the future of WebDriver in the future. But WebdriverIO has recently added support for the Chrome DevTools protocol and will be kind of expanding out support as these other packages become more popular. We're going to talk about Chrome DevTools more in later in this presentation, but I did want to mention it here because that's one of the newer features of it, is that it's not just for WebDriver. Let's talk about some of the feature-rich nature of it. First off, it provides you, it's really adaptable to how you want to write your tests. So for instance, you can choose from 3 frameworks. You can use Mocha, you can use Jasmine, or you can use Cucumber. Cucumber is very popular out there, and so support was added through community efforts, and the core maintainers support was added. And I should mention, I did not write WebdriverIO. I have contributed to it. I am part of the technical steering committee, but I am not the author of WebdriverIO. Sometimes it gets confused because I have a lot of videos on it and I talk about it a lot, but the credit for that goes to Christian Broman and the rest of the team there, who have worked endlessly to make a great product out there, so they deserve all the credit. Okay, back to the feature-rich nature. There's also support for a lot of services that can add on functionality to WebdriverIO. and also reporters out there. We're going to take a look at a list of some of these services and reporters in just a minute. But what's really important about that is that you can add on this really helpful functionality just by installing an extra package or adding a single line or clicking a single button. I'll show you that in a minute. But it's great how much functionality you get out of this tool. Along those lines, if there is something that you don't find in the tool, it's easily extendable. In one of the more, actually one of the older versions, WebdriverIO version 4, it's currently on version 6, they added the ability to more easily extend the core framework to hook in and add your own services. And that has obviously paid off by the number of services out there available for you. The final thing I want to mention is that it's written in Node.js. It is a JavaScript tool. You can do, it used to require Python. It no longer requires Python. The changes were made to update that. It's a great change because then it's one less thing you have to worry about. But for me, what's really important is that I get to write my test in JavaScript, and that's how I write my code. And so now I can easily switch as a front-end developer. I can easily switch from writing code in the JavaScript to writing tests in JavaScript. And it's just part of that nature, and that language is very familiar. And so any tips and tricks I learn in JavaScript, I get to use in my test right away. So I mentioned services and reporters. Here's a list of all the current services available. There's actually more than this. You could search, and there's several third-party kind of tools that have been added that haven't made it on this list yet, but there's plenty out there. So you can see there's a lot of services. There's an Appium service. So that way you can run mobile tests, and it kind of hooks up and helps you get an Appium server running. Applitools is a great third-party tool that allows you to do visual regression testing. Hey, BrowserStack service. We're actually going to take a look at that service in just a minute and what that does to help us along. You can use BrowserStack without this service, but adding the service on adds a couple of really nice things that I'll show you when we get there. But there's, all sorts of stuff. Sauce service is, Selenium standalone service. That's the one I was looking at. That is a great service for getting Selenium running on your local machine in case you want to do cross-browser testing. You don't have to have Selenium running in order to do your tests, and we'll talk about that later. I'm going to keep saying that. But yeah, there's a whole bunch of services here. How about reporters? So reporters are a way to get output from how your tests ran. So these tests pass, these tests fails, that sort of thing. That's what a reporter does. The one that I use mainly is Spec Reporter, but I also use Allure Reporter. Allure Reporter will print out a website that you can use. You can show that to a manager, a project manager, and say, okay, here's the test run, here's what passed, here's what failed, and how things are doing. HTML Reporter is similar to that. So a lot of options. And the thing is, if you don't like if you're missing something here, you can add a custom service and reporter. It does take a little bit of technical know-how. I'm not going to get into it here, but it is part of the framework to be able to easily add, or more easily add, services and reporters if you so need to. How about, aside from the core features, just some niceties that may not sell well, on paper, but having used this framework for a long time, I just love about it. It makes writing tests more concise and more compact. And I'll show you some examples in just a minute, but things like it combines commands for you, so you don't have to have multiple commands to do something. If you're, if it makes sense, like anytime you use these two commands are always going to be together, well, let's just make that something easy to do. It also has synchronous support. I'll mention that in a minute. Through community contributions, it's become much more React friendly. This was not something that was in the core framework to begin with. And it wasn't something that was really on the timeline for the core developers to add. It was a community edition, and it went through a long process, but it went through a full process of making sure that everything is up to standard with the code standards and everything. But what the community did, they added this ability to fetch React components by their name, by their property, by their state, also to have shadow DOM support. So I like mentioning this because it's one of those examples of how the community really added some really key functionality that, you know, not everybody out there uses React. I don't use it all that much. I do use it sometimes, but there are people who definitely need it, and having this support is super handy. And then the last thing I'm going to mention as an ICD is this a configuration utility that we're going to take a look at that helps you get started with your tests really fast, helps you get up and running super quick, and we'll take a look at that. So onto the concise test writing. Here is an example of how WebdriverIO simplifies things. So on the top line, that driver.findElement, that I believe is pulled from the Selenium WebDriver JavaScript repo. You might be very familiar with it. And then, but basically it finds an element by an ID of submit, and then it clicks that element. With WebdriverIO, it simplifies that down, and the $sign syntax, you might recognize that if you were doing web development years ago from jQuery. And it's more, I can't remember if it's pretty popular still today. I just know it from WebdriverIO, I'm so familiar with it. But basically it allows you to say, I want an element reference here. And then you pass in here, I pass in a CSS selector. But it has kind of intrinsic support for multiple selectors. You don't have to do the by.id bit or by.classname. You use CSS selectors. You can use XPath as well. There's a few other selectors you can use, but I won't get into it too much. But for me as a front-end developer, I love that. I love that I can use CSS selectors. And I know I can do it in other tools, but WebdriverIO has such good support for it just built in right there. So that's one example of kind of simplifying it. Here's another example of, I mentioned sync mode. So when you're writing when you're running your tests, your test sends a request to like Selenium or Chrome driver or the Chrome DevTools protocol, and then it does some things and gets a response. That's an asynchronous request. Not to get too much into asynchronous, I'm trying to not bog you down with too many details, but the thing is, when you're writing tests, you have to add these awaits in your tests in order to wait for that response to come back. And so over here we have, I believe this is the Selenium WebDriver JavaScript example. And you see it's got a bunch of awaits and stuff, and the syncs as well. On the right side, with WebDriver, with the sync mode turned on, you don't have to have those awaits. And the reason for that is WebdriverIO, I believe it was probably Christian Broman who did this. He said, we're always going to need to write these awaits. What if there was a way that we didn't have to write them? So it still runs asynchronously, but you don't have to handle that as a test writer. So it's so much cleaner. Obviously, there are other differences in what the test is actually doing, but I kind of wanted to show you, like, this is what a full test would look like with all these awaits and asyncs. And this is what the test in WebdriverIO, when you have sync mode turned on, looks like. It's very simple, and it's all about just simple commands that you're going to run. And to me, that's really helpful when you're thinking about maintaining tests and the readability of your test as well. The last bit I want to mention with the niceties is this configuration utility. So when you're starting out with WebdriverIO, you want to create a configuration file. The configuration file is going to hold all of your various configurations, believe it or not. And this configuration utility kind of walks you through what are the main configurations you're going to want to set. And so this utility is actually advanced beyond this, but it's kind of an example of, you open up a terminal, you write WDIO config, and it starts running through your configuration. And then it also it will install the tools that you ask for. Moving on away from features to requirements. These are the requirements for WebdriverIO. Not super long in my opinion. Node version 12. And honestly, I've been using version 10 forever now. I've used both 12 and 10. You might be able to get away with Node version 8 if you need to. I wouldn't recommend it. I'd recommend 10 or higher, but the official documents say 12. You also need to have one of the three, either Chrome or a Blink-based browser. That's the Chrome's engine is called Blink, I believe, and there's a few other browsers based off of it. So have that installed, or you're going to need to get a browser driver installed, like Chrome driver or Gecko driver for Firefox, something like that, or use a Selenium server as well to drive it. So you'll just need Node to run your tests, and then a browser to be based off of. And honestly, you don't even need this if you're using a tool like BrowserStack, because it handles that browser for you. What's key here, you don't have to have Java installed. You do if you want to run Selenium Server, but you don't need to run Selenium Server to run your tests. You can use a browser driver or just the Chrome DevTools. And you don't have to have Python installed, which was something that was needed before, but is no longer needed. Okay, let's jump into a demo, and I'm going to cross my fingers that this works. So what we're going to do is we are going to go through the Getting Started guide. Well, kind of go through the Getting Started guide. Hey, look, that's a video from me. That's from my YouTube channel. And they have a really cleaned up Getting Started guide. It wasn't as polished before, but it's really gotten a lot simpler, I believe, than it used to be with some of the features. So what we're going to do is I'm going to open up a terminal here, and I'm going to copy this over. So I'm going to make a directory called WDIO test, and then I am going to move into that directory. So I make the directory, move into it. The next thing I'm going to do is this init y. And what this does, it creates a package JSON. And the package JSON is part of Node and NPM. And it just stores dependencies for you. So in this case, we're going to create a new dependency. We're going to install the @WDIO CLI. It's a package. No, that WDIO is where all the WebdriverIO packages are stored under. And the CLI is the command line interface. And actually, I've already done this, and it looks like it's running a little bit slow. So what I'm going to do is, let's see, I'm going to make a, yeah, I was afraid it was going to run a little bit slow, which makes sense. So let's go to the, whoops, there we go. So here, I've already got it all set up, and I don't have to install it. So in this is a backup folder that I created that already has everything installed for us. So I'm just going to skip ahead. Imagine that npm I command already ran. Okay, now we have the WebdriverIO command line interface installed for us. We can use that by typing npx wdio. And let's make that just a little bit bigger. And if you have a configuration file already made, it's going to run your tests. Otherwise, it's going to ask you if you want to create a configuration file. I've actually already created a configuration file. So I'm going to type in config. And what this is going to do is kind of start again through that process. So npx is part of npm. It allows you to run locally installed packages that have a CLI. So here we have a WebdriverIO package that has a command line interface for it. So npx allows us to do that. Okay, now on to the configuration helper. Normally, I would choose on my local machine. So this is just going to be a bunch of questions for us, but we're going to choose in the cloud using BrowserStack. It's going to ask us what's the host address. We can leave that blank, and it's going to default to BrowserStack. We can also go with the default here, and then it's going to ask us environment variable for our username and our access key. These aren't your actual username and access keys. This is a reference to where you store them. I've already got my username and access key stored in my environment variables on my local computer. I'm not going to talk about that, but I did want to mention that that's kind of what that's talking about. Next, it asks us which framework we want to use. We're going to go with Mocha because that's what I prefer. And then do we want to run it in synchronous or asynchronous? I definitely prefer synchronous. I had mentioned this before, but this is almost 100% of my time is spent writing in synchronous. So just use synchronous. It helps so much. There are some things you have to work around in very unique cases, but it's not too difficult once you understand it. Test, or where are your test specs located? This is the folder that has your test files. Here it's going to be test/specs. And this is a glob pattern. So this says any folder, any file that ends in .js. So we're going to go with that. And it asks us if we want to auto-generate some files. Yes, that would be wonderful. So this is a way to get started with some test files to kind of help you get a good idea of what's going on. Ask us if we want to use page objects. I will say yes. You could actually just hit enter, and then it asks us where our page objects are located. It's under the page objects folder. Are you using a compiler? No, we won't worry about that. which reporter do you want to use? So you can come in here and like say I want to add Allure, it will add that. I'm just going to stick with spec. And then which service do we want to use, or what do we want to add any services? I'm not going to use Chrome Driver. I'm just going to click that and I'm going to zoom on down to BrowserStack. But if I just scroll down, look at all those reporters, okay, or services. That's it. It loops around. It's really not that many, but it is a fair number of services, and it's as easy as pressing space. And now you have that service, and it will install it for you. So I'm going to hit enter, and then it's going to ask me. The last question is, what is the base URL? And you can add your base URL here. It says localhost. I'm just going to hit Control-C. That's going to cancel out of the configuration helper. And the reason for that is I don't want to overwrite the other configuration that I made, because it's going to also install NPM packages, and I don't want to spend time installing those packages and kind of waste your time. So what this is going to end up doing is create a new file called WebdriverIO configuration or conf.js. Let's open up that file really quick and take a short browse through it. So here's what that file looks like. It's just a big object, and it gets exported to a config property. And on here are all the things that we set up. So our user, our key, where our tests are located. You can actually have multiple locations if you want to. You can also exclude files. So if for some reason you want to exclude some files in there, you can do that. Pretty nice. Max instances. This is something that WebdriverIO supports out of the box, is the ability to run multiple tests in parallel. So you have 5 different test files. You can run them all at the same time. Really helps speed up your tests. Here's the capabilities that you can set. Here we just use Chrome. You can change log level, base URL, services. You can add more services. You can add more reporters here. Just change it up all you want. And the last thing I want to mention about this file are the hooks. We have an onPrepare hook, a before suite hook. So all these hooks allow you to kind of inject functionality in the middle of your tests. I use the before hook pretty often. So that's the configuration file. The next thing I want to show is the test itself. So this is what a test file looks like. This is what the generated test file was. And you can see it loads the login page and the secure page. Those are page objects. Hence our page object's name. We call login page.open. Well, let's open that up and let's put this side by side. And you can kind of see what login page does. So class of login page extends page. This is JavaScript syntax. Another thing I like about WebdriverIO, it doesn't get in the way. So when we can use plain JavaScript syntax, you use it. Really cool. Here's an element reference. So we have the an element with an ID of username, an element with an ID of password, a button with a type of submit. Those are all stored as element references. We use those element references and we set the value on them when we call login page.login. Calls this function, we set the value on it, and then we click the button. It makes our test very compact and to the point. And then the last part of our test is going to be our assertions. So here we expect the secure page. Well, what's in there? See, secure page. Oh, that's just another element reference. So we're going to expect this element to exist on the page. Then we're going to expect this element to have text containing this text. So now we want to go ahead and run our test. And to do that, we just type WPX WDIO, and it's going to run our test. And one thing you're going to notice is that it creates your BrowserStack session for you right away. That was all the configuration I had to do. I had to say, I want the BrowserStack service. Actually, I don't even think I had to say that. I had to put in my BrowserStack credentials. It can only help you so much with those BrowserStack credentials, but and look, it's done, and here are the results. This is that spec reporter that I mentioned, and now it ran. So let's see what that looks like in BrowserStack. Here were some previous test runs. Notice that long session name. That's actually going to go away in just a second. Actually, if I click on it, it should go away. There. Now, oh, that was from before. There we have the name of our test. This is part of that BrowserStack service. So it takes the name of your test and sends it to BrowserStack so BrowserStack knows what test run. Here's the full list of commands, and we can actually watch this run. I'll skip through just a minute. There, it loaded it and everything. So that's how you write your first set of tests in WebdriverIO. You know, that was what, 5 minutes, and you're start to finish, and it's already integrated with BrowserStack, which is so cool. that you don't have to spend you know, days trying to get this integration built in. Which I'm speaking from experience. I spent days trying to get things integrated. Nope, WebdriverIO already supports it. So really cool. Now, what's new? Let's take a look at what's new. And I had already touched on this a little bit, but these expect assertions. So in my code example, we had that expect the Flash container or whatever to have text. Before, what that would look like is you'd have to get the element, you would have to get, you'd have to get the text of that element, then use a custom assertion library to equal this. Now it's a lot more streamlined. It's expect this element, this h1 heading tag, to have text of heading. Go figure. There's a whole number of assertions out there that you can use, but it's not just that it's more concise. There's also some really nice things about it in that this will actually wait for the h1 to have the text. So if it doesn't have the text to begin with, it's going to wait half a second and then try it again, and then wait half a second and try it again. And the reason for that is if you've worked with web apps, you know that a lot of these web apps don't make full page reloads. They reload behind the scenes using REST API calls, and so it doesn't reload the page. Well, WebDriver, Selenium, Chrome DevTools, they're not going to know that about the website, so you have to add these waits in there. Well, with this, it's built in, so you have these waits built in, so you don't have to worry about that. It's also going to have better error messages, just by the fact that instead of expecting two values to equal each other, you know that you're looking for the text of this value, so it's going to tell you that H1 didn't have the text that we were expecting it to have. Really great improvement. It's one of those little things that may not look that big, but in the long run, it's going to make a huge difference. So I'm really excited about that. Another new item is Chrome DevTools support. So I had mentioned at the very beginning that WebdriverIO was no longer about just Selenium and WebDriver. And I want to say Selenium and WebDriver are awesome packages, and they're really great. They have support for things that Chrome DevTools doesn't support, but I am going to get a little excited about Chrome DevTools here. So I just wanted to kind of mention that this is in no way detracting from what WebDriver provides. And WebDriver is different from WebdriverIO. There is a difference there. WebDriver is a protocol. It's from W3C. WebdriverIO is this framework that helps run commands through the protocol. So anyway, on to what is great about Chrome DevTools. Well, WebdriverIO created a new DevTools package. DevTools, this lives completely outside of the core WebdriverIO package, but it is used by WebdriverIO version 6. And what it does, it maps all the normal WebDriver commands to run in Puppeteer. If you're not familiar with Puppeteer, that's a Chrome tool that allows you to automate Chrome browsers using the Chrome DevTools protocol. The key features of it, it's faster, and I'll explain why in a minute, or for the most part, it's faster. You can argue about that if you want to. You can say anything's faster than anything else, but anyway, in my opinion, for the most part, it's going to be faster, and I'll explain why. It also provides some really cool functionality to let you hook into the browser and do some really nice things, and we'll take a peek at that in just a minute. So why is it faster? Well, we look at how does browser automation work for WebdriverIO specifically. So we have our command up here, and this command would either run through a browser driver, like Chrome driver, Gecko driver, whatever, that would send it to the browser and then back, or it would run through Selenium Grid, that would send it to a browser driver or something like Appium and send it back. And you notice over here, we've got our browsers, but there's also Puppeteer, and see how Puppeteer goes straight to Chrome? That's going to be key here. And then I also want to mention CypressIO. I love CypressIO. I think they have great functionality built into it. Definitely look into them. They are kind of a competitor to WebdriverIO. I wouldn't really call it a competitor because I believe both of us, or both of our teams, or our objectives here are to advance test automation and make it easier to do test automation, make it more useful to do test automation. And so we're just all working together towards that end goal. And they're able to provide support that WebdriverIO isn't able to provide. So like, let's all work together here. So I just wanted to just mention that, that we're all working on this together. So that's really cool. Anyway, back to the point about how it's faster. So normally through WebDriver, it would have to send the command through Chrome driver, which would then send it through Chrome DevTools to the browser. By sending it through Puppeteer, it doesn't have that Chrome driver step in the middle. It's just pure Chrome DevTools, and it gets sent to the browser and back. So just taking out that middleman makes it faster because you have just less things to do. Now, Chrome driver does provide, and WebDriver, the protocol, does provide functionality that Puppeteer doesn't provide, but vice versa, Chrome DevTools provides some functionality that I don't believe WebDriver provides yet. Maybe that's going to change in the future. And hopefully it does, because I'm all for more support. So that's how it can be faster. Now, what type of functionality can we get introduced here? One of the functionalities is that we're going to want to slow down our test. Now, why would you want to slow down your test? Well, if you want to simulate a slow user connection. So here we can use the new browser.throttle command, and we can pass in this keyword of regular 3G. They also have, I don't know, like bad 3G, things like that. And that's actually going to slow your network conditions. It's going to simulate a slow network connection. And now you can test your website with a slow internet connection, which is very important to test. You can also throttle the network connection you can just like turn it off. Now you can test offline mode just with a single command. It turns your network connection off. And this is through the Chrome DevTools protocol. It hooks into the Chrome network conditions. Chrome has its own network conditions that you can set, and this allows you to set it through an automated way. If you don't like those options that are built in, you can also manually throttle it yourself. That's really useful. I actually use this to test that my tests won't break when the network is slow, because sometimes I forget to add the right weight in there and whatnot. Another really cool, really new feature in the past month and it's actually in beta right now, are these network mocks. So if you are familiar with the idea of REST API and websites sending requests to a REST API, this is kind of going to do that. So what it's going to do is a mock is going to, the browser is going to send a request to the server for some resource. It's going to return, and what WebdriverIO is going to do is say, oh, I'm going to yoink that here and instead take this custom response and send it back to the browser. And this is super helpful if you're talking about test fixtures, to be able to have consistent data on your site for testing purposes only. And you can also modify JavaScript, CSS files. You can abort requests, cool things like that. Let's take a look at how that works, because I am, again, really excited about that. So I actually have a file in here called mock.txt. I'm going to rename that, and I had it named as txt so it wouldn't run the first time, but now we do want it to run, and we'll bring that back to the single view. And here we say, when the browser makes a request for this URL, instead of responding with what it normally responds with, respond with this injected stuff. So let's take a look at what the website normally looks like. When we load the website, it normally looks like this. So there's no to-dos. This is the normal to-do demo app that's pretty popular out there. And no to-dos to begin with. But what we want for our test is to have to-dos in here so that we can show that there are to-dos. So we're going to respond with this custom JSON. And then we're going to load our page, and it's going to expect the output to be this custom JSON, even though normally it wouldn't. So we want to run this file, but actually I want to show you what it looks like locally so you can see how it looks injected. So I'm going to show you another cool thing about WebdriverIO. Remember that big configuration file we had? What if we want to customize this for a specific instance? In this case, I want to customize it so it runs locally and not through BrowserStack. So I'm going to load the configuration. I'm going to delete the BrowserStack user and key. Now, WebdriverIO won't think, oh, I need to connect to BrowserStack. It's going to think, oh, I just connect locally. And I'm going to remove the BrowserStack service from my services and export that. Now, to run this through this custom configuration file, I'm going to type wpx wdio like before. Then I'm going to pass in my custom configuration file. And then I could run this, but it's going to run both my tests. I don't want to run both my tests. I only want to run the spec, my mock.js file. So I'm going to say spec equals mock. This is going to say only run test files that have mock in their name. And I use that feature all the time. And so I had to highlight it because it's super cool to let you run a single test and helps to debug. And of course, it's not working because why did it not work? because that's how demos go. It wouldn't be great if it didn't just work the first time. I'm in WebdriverIO test. I'm in WebdriverIO test. I've saved my file. Let's see. We can see here it's running through DevTools protocol and it's not injecting the data. Well, that's a bummer of a test because I don't get it. I don't get it. It was working and I am amazed. I wonder if, like I said, it's in beta. So yep, that should be the latest version and it's not running for some reason, even though I had it running before. But anyway, what you would have seen if things had gone well is it would have had the items on there. And then the other thing is that it would have been super fast. And so I was going to be like, hey, it's super fast. So I want to pause it. I'm going to use this browser.debug command, which I use all the time as well. Yeah, that's all there. And it's using DevTools, so it should work. Oh, there, it worked. I don't know. At least it worked. So I'm not a liar. It is there. And as you can see, it's paused. It has stopped. And here in my terminal, I have it saying the browser execution has stopped. And I can actually do stuff like I can run, let's see. I can run commands in here. So I'll do get text and see it returns the text of that single one. So browser debug, super handy, love it. And then just to complete our test, I type exit and it finishes running through the test and I get my check mark and everything's happy. And that's browser debug. I'll remove it because I don't want it anymore. But yeah, I use browser debug all the time. It's another wonderful, wonderful part of WebdriverIO and totally useful. Oh, hey, I'm glad that finally worked. Like I said, it is in beta, so it's going to have some hiccups, but whew. Okay, that's going to end things for this demo. If you want to learn more, check out WebdriverIO, just that URL, webdriver.io. There is also an office hours program that I specifically wanted to mention. Christian Broman, who leads the project, he has offered his time to help people contribute to the framework and get up and running with the framework. So I believe it's mainly about contributing to the framework, but it's still a super cool program if you want to help out. I have a ton of videos on this, videos.clamp.in. That's my YouTube site. I also do live streams every once in a while where I answer questions from people if as they have questions. And then again, I've got my book, the Web App Testing Guidebook. This is self-published, something I've been spending over a year building and hopefully we'll have finished very soon, but you can go out there and buy it and give me feedback right away. And any updates to that book are automatically sent to you. Once you have it, you're going to get updates right away. So that kind of thing. And finally, again, I am available for consulting if you're interested as a team or just individual consulting. Just reach out to me. My email address is me@clamp.in. And I think it's a great time for Q&A now.
Awesome. Thanks, Kevin. A demo is not a demo without something going wrong.
I know. That caught me by surprise because I had almost finished everything. Yeah, but I'm glad I finally.
Great. So we've got quite a few questions and we've not got a lot of time. So I'll try to go through some of these quickly. What about a couple of questions around functionality with WebdriverIO? One is, how do you manage parallel execution with WebdriverIO?
It's through the max instances. You can set a certain number of parallel tests to run at the same time, and it's based off of your the files. So if you have 3 files, you can run three tests at the same time. If you only have 2 files, you can't run 3 tests at the same time. It only runs it by the different files, and that's good in my opinion because a lot of these files kind of need each other because they're testing the same page in a single file. If you tried running the tests in the same file at the same time, you'd probably get a lot of data conflicts. So it just bases it off of tests. But yeah, it's just that max instances setting.
Okay. Couple of questions around, you touched on this briefly with sync and async when you were setting up the script, setting up the config for your first test run. So what are sort of the consequences of doing one versus the other? And maybe you could elaborate a little bit about that.
Right. The main consequence of using sync mode is that if you do need to run a non-WebdriverIO command that is asynchronous, you need to wrap it in a browser.call command. So that's the main issue, but it works just fine as long as you have that browser.call command. You can work around that. So using async, the biggest trouble is that you have to handle your asyncs and awaits yourself. So when you run like browser.url, you have to say await browser.url. And that just gets to be a little bit more work than I think is necessary. And with the synchronous library, it takes care of that for you.
Got it. And does WebdriverIO work inside of build management tools like TeamCity or Jenkins?
Yep. It actually, I believe it has a couple of services for that. But yeah, I've used it inside of CI/CDs, Jenkins, TeamCity, CircleCI, almost, yeah, it's just a Node.js tool. And when it has a test failure, it will use that process.exit code. And so it will test, you can have it fail your build. You can use that build to run an Allure report. So I've generated Allure reports and posted them up to the CI/CD server for later usage. It runs really well through there.
Got it. And what about mobile device support with WebdriverIO? How does that work?
Yep.
Yeah.
That works through Appium. And so you just get Appium installed. And my latest stream on my YouTube channel is actually goes through how to get started with Appium, WebdriverIO, and mobile devices as well. You do have to have a mobile device available. I believe BrowserStack has a great selection of mobile devices to use. So yeah, you could just use your BrowserStack service with an Appium service, and they work together, and you update your capabilities. And it takes a little bit of tinkering, but yes, it definitely has support through that.
Okay, let's see, a couple more questions. The page object module, I think when you again were setting up the configuration, you were specifying where the page object files are located. How are those created, or who creates that?
Those are, yeah, the tester will write those page objects, and once you get the hang for it, it's pretty, I don't want to say simple, but you kind of repeat a lot of the same steps to make it. The main parts are you've got your element references and then some custom functions. And I actually talk about this a lot in my book. It's one of the big focuses on the book is how to write page objects and extend them out. But they're just JavaScript with a little bit of WebdriverIO in there to run commands. But the main benefit is that it organizes your pages, and you can write cleaner tests in the long term.
Awesome, great. I think that's all we have time for, Kevin. Thanks a lot. Great introduction to WebdriverIO, awesome. And really excited about some of the things that you were showing us in beta. So can't wait to see some of that hit sort of mass adoption. See what we can do with that. So
awesome. Thanks for having me.
Thanks a lot for your time, Kevin. Have a great day.